And I'm a principal at Design Consultants here in Somerville, and my undergraduate degree is in civil engineering, and my graduate degree is in traffic and transportation. So I do feel comfortable talking about civil and drainage and sewer and water issues as well as traffic. So as it relates to drainage, we're in the early stages, but we have reserved some spaces in particular to do some on-site mitigation, some low-impact development features that would allow the water to come in, get collected in catch basins, and be able to be stored and permeate the ground in areas that are designated within the site, and also potentially around the perimeter. Most recently, we had a discussion about the area, and as I get into the traffic, I'll describe mitigation and changes that we are proposing to White Brook Parkway, the intersection at White Brook Parkway and Powerhouse. And there's some opportunities to do some nice low-impact development techniques in there, which would be rain gardens and other features that are landscape features that are beautiful landscape features, but also help in terms of mitigating runoff. Please keep in mind that the site does slope naturally from North Street down towards the White Brook, right? It's a natural topographical feature of this particular site. So we'll be collecting all of that runoff from the roof leaders, delivering them typically to some sort of infiltration system, and then have emergency runoff connections to the existing drain lines that actually do go out after we pre-treat the runoff so that it meets the stormwater management policy. So,
is there any way to anticipate the changes to the underwater groundwater systems? Because that, in my opinion, is what was not handled well in past projects. Not anything specific, we don't, but I mean,
yeah, as we
you have changes to what happens, not above ground because you're regrading and things are going around big buildings, and other people take the brunt of the change.
As we get into the site a little bit more, we'll be doing some test pitting. We'll be also collecting geotechnical information. That's a little bit further down the road. We'll understand the elevation of the groundwater, and we'll make sure that we stay at least 2 feet above that groundwater with any of the new infrastructure that we put in. And I think we have had problems in Somerville in particular with high groundwater tables in certain areas. So what we want to do is make sure that we do a robust study of the groundwater elevation and make sure we're staying above that and not interrupting the natural flow that exists today.
I'm going to go over here. The blue areas, that's showing you a ground floor plan. So there'll be some community spaces on the ground floor. For instance, importantly in the lower right here, there's a community center that's going to be associated with the extension of the Northwood Street playground that would come onto the site. Here there will be some community space. I mentioned how the street curves and you come across a landscape courtyard to that overlook. There'll be community space along there as well. So it's really suggesting whether it's a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom.
Thank you.
I saw a question actually asked Jessica.
Yes, sorry, yes.
2 questions. One is for the civil engineer. Is this a flood designated flood zone?
Okay.
Oh, sorry, right there. You have no idea?
No, I didn't say that.
Okay, sorry. Sorry. Okay.
That was your first question to you too?
I do have another question, which is, will the tenants have access to all of the green spaces?
Okay, well, let's do the first one.
Yeah, the first one, actually the flood zone is off of the site, just on this corner by the White Brook Parkway, so we are not within that flood zone with any of our structures.
Even with putting parking underground, because if I'm correct by what they said, there's going to be parking under all those buildings, right? So is that going to be taken care of too in case there's some weird leakage into there?
So when we talk about floodplains in particular, it's sufficient, it's on the ground. What you're talking about is groundwater.
Yeah.
And so a study will be done with a geotechnical engineer will put in borings and wells and look at the groundwater elevations. The other question is relevant to floodplain,
Right,
okay,
and
sufficient.
climate change.
Yeah, climate change is a huge factor.
And-
We're the
and
Bay
I think
State, man.
within my memory, the corner of Broadway and Ellsworth Brook Parkway has flooded so that the entire intersection was filled with water, and I'm wondering if that happens again, what's the impact on underground parking?
So let me just also add flag sort of high level where we are in this process. You know, we have not engineered these drawings yet. This is a concept site plan that we wanted to bring out to this community before we started engineering drawings on how do we fix the water problems, right? I will say that we actually did not point out the new intersection up here that we're proposing. Probably because David's gonna do it here in a minute. Which button gives me light start? So this is the Ellsworth Brook Powder House rotary, now converted into a T intersection. So this is the major infrastructure project I was alluding to when I went through the finances. David's gonna walk us through that when we get into the traffic section, sort of how that intersection will work. But when we re-engineer this intersection, that's something we could take a look at.
Okay, I'm worried about the underground parking, Gloucester's, high school's parking lot.
25 affordable units in there, 15 of those are replacement housing units from the Clarendon project. 10 of those are what we call middle income housing units that are analogous to like an 80% income tier. Buildings E, C, these townhouses, and building D are being developed by POA in partnership with SEC. Those are roughly 80% replacement housing units, 20% workforce units. That workforce income level, and this responds to Jessica's early question about the income levels and what is affordable, that workforce level is actually determined by mass housing. I anticipate that's going to be somewhere between 100 and 110% of AMI. I don't yet know where they're going to set it, because they set it based on the market. When they go out, they say the market in Somerville pays 150% of AMI. Workforce housing needs to be 20 to 30% lower than that.
An example of what that is on your.
What that income is. So I have it.
94 is about 95.
A family of 4. 100% of AMI would be $100,000 would be the income limit for that family. 80% is not on my sheet, but I bet it's $80,000. Thanks, guys. I'm really good at math. So I saw a hand over here somewhere. Yes, it was yours.
Yeah, Roncavallo, 70 Victoria Street. So I live within proximity of this development. My question is, how has the density gone up basically? And this is my first time coming to one of these meetings. I'm trying to understand how the density has gone up so dramatically. It's basically gone up 2.5 times. And I do want to make the comment that when I heard the density, I consider it staggering. It seems extremely dense for this site. And I know all about traffic studies, but I just have to make a general statement that the density seems staggering to me.
How did they determine that? Arbitrarily.
Well, we looked. So when we stepped back from this project, we remember at the core our goal is to replace 216 public housing units. And to do that, we need to fund them. And one of the key funders for this project is that cross subsidy from the market rate developer. And in this case, that's $16 million. And they are building 253 market rate units. So in large part, what we needed to do here was achieve enough density to drive some cross subsidy. You know, some people have actually asked us, could you do more and get more cross subsidy from the market rate? We don't think this site can accommodate that. We think this is an appropriate level for this site in this community, and we're going to go through the traffic and talk about those concerns. But I just wanted to back you up because you missed some of the earlier meetings on sort of why and how some of these things were thought about. Okay, and otherwise I can just take your comment. I'm going to go to this young lady over there with glasses.
I'm also new. So you kind of described it, but I just try to understand the integration or the placement of the different types of units. And then I'm hearing the numbers of units, but I'm not hearing the numbers of residents. So what are the predictions that you're talking about? You know, this many units, are they for families? Are they for, couples? And many units.
So we have 216 replacement housing units, and I'm going to ask the housing authority how many folks typically live in the 216 units?
188.
An average of 3, so 216 times 3. That's 600-ish. Thank you. And then we have another 253 from our market rate partners, averaging 1.5 people, 2 people per unit. 1.5 to 2 people
Basically,
per
you're
unit.
doubling.
Someone's keeping track of this, right?
That's basically doubling it, right?
So
Give or take
I'm
a
just trying to
little.
respond to your question. And then we have another 70, what I'm gonna call middle income units. We're gonna say that's an average household size of 2,
More than doubling.
maybe 2.5. Can someone do that math for me? Please? 160 plus 600 plus 500. We're at 1,200 people, to your question. And to your question about how the income mixing break down, that was your first question, right? That's shown here on this slide. Let me just,
Where are they located? Is it this top? I guess I can see it here.
maybe it's easier if I do it on the site plan. Yeah. I'll just do it again.
I think that one's
Well, that's good
just
enough.
fine.
Oh.
That's
Okay.
just fine.
So again, buildings E, D, C, and the townhouses are 80% replacement housing units, 20% moderate income units. Buildings A and B are, they have 253 market rate units and 25 affordable units. I'm gonna go to, I saw a hand back there, the red jacket, yes.
Yeah, I'm still curious about parking. All the market rate places have, parking?
I'm gonna ask if folks would like us to go ahead and move through the traffic portion of the presentation, because then we're gonna get to parking if I do that.
Part is, it's gonna be roughly 90 and 90. There's various reasons our buildings are built differently and designed differently than Corey's buildings and so forth. So let's use those as round numbers. So what we're trying to do is find a balance where we can show the banks and our investors that on an annual basis, the amount of rent we can collect after the expenses of operating the building is going to pay back about 5 or 6% of what it costs it take us to design and build the building. So that's the basic math.
I was gonna move into parking, traffic and parking.
Can I just say one thing, which is that this was not private housing for many years, and it could have continued as tax-funded public housing. So this is not a foregone conclusion, I don't think. It need not go this way.
Well, we have 216 state public housing units that are existing, operating, deteriorating.
But they could have been fixed.
And we see an opportunity here
To make a lot of money.
to recreate 216 deeply low income units for a very long time.
You said you were calling.
Jessica.
How many 4-bedrooms, which we have very few of in Somerville, are you putting on the project?
No 4 bedrooms.
Why?
There are currently no 4 bedrooms on the site, and we're not building any 4 bedrooms.
There's currently no market rate units on the site, but you're building market rate units. Why isn't the project based towards the need of the city?
It very much is based on the need of the city when we build our 60 and the extra 10,
How
or
many?
70 middle income units. I can just answer the question. We're not building any 4 bedrooms.
How many 3-bedrooms are you building?
We are building roughly 53, 54 3-bedrooms.
How many are there now?
33.
So you're only increasing it? You're not even doubling it, and you're not putting any 4-bedrooms.
That's correct.
Okay.
So I'm going to turn it over to Senator Jalen.
Could you just have either repeat the question or have people speak louder when you say yes?
I understand. So the question Jessica asked was, are you building any 4 bedrooms? To which the response was, we are not. The second question was, how many 3 bedrooms are you building? We are building 54, I think, it's somewhere in that range. And there are 33 currently. We're going to move to traffic, except David, there he is going to take over. 216 undocumented households can live. Going forward, there will be 216 deeply low-income units, 162 of which will be available to undocumented households, and 54 of which you will have to show citizenship or green card. The reason we need those units is because they deliver $17 million to this project.
The market rate building should be doing that.
And so, you know, we can tit for tat on where can we go and identify another resource to fill that gap. To date, we have not been able to do that. We've been working on this project for almost 2.5 years. And additionally, you know, we've been doing this kind of work for a really long time. And so, you know, this is what we think we need to do to get this project done. Jessica, just let me get through these and then we'll come back. So a couple other things that have been sort of going on around in these relocation and tenant relations conversations is, can I keep my kids in the school system? Unfortunately, Karen Norman, who's the Ward 7 school committee person, had to leave tonight to go to a meeting, but she's been actively working with the school committee to make an amendment to, Rich Malolo is here from the school department. And you know, we did a community meeting on December 13th with the residents of Clarendon Hill where we spoke to this. They are working on a rules change that will be heard next Monday at the school committee to vote to approve that any family relocated from Clarendon Hill who might be relocated to Medford, Malden, Everett, Arlington can keep their kid in Somerville public schools during the relocation process until they come back.
Is it only those towns or?
Oh no, I'm sorry, and they're relocated anywhere.
Oh, okay, just clarifying.
Yes.
On that point, it's good to hear they'll be able to, hopefully if they change the rules, they'll be able to still come here. But will that policy change also cover the cost of transporting the child?
So we've been working closely with the school department on those costs. You know, that is our that is our cost to bear. So we have been working with them on identifying what do we think those costs will be, how will we pay for them, how will we coordinate that access, because it's a very logistical heavy process. The school department has asked us to take care of things like after school care. And so we're working through that with them. I can only say, you know, we won't really know how much it's going to cost until we get into the process. But we have committed to carrying that expenditure.
I thought you said $7.5 million needed for transportation.
So 7.5 is our budget at this time. Can I get through?
Yeah, I just had a question about the transportation, but.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
In the interest of the public and also preserving the privacy of all applicants, are you willing, or is SHA or anyone involved in this project willing to publish the number of returning applicants?
Willing to publish the number of households that will come back?
Returning applicants.
We hope and everyone.
Just the number.
Just to know?
Yeah, just
But we don't know yet, right? You mean when they come back?
Yeah.
I don't see why we wouldn't. We'd love to. We hope that everyone comes back. So just a couple other things. We've been working on a priority system. So, you know, folks who have school-age children or have medical needs will have a priority in our relocation process. And importantly, the rent that is paid by residents will stay the same during the relocation period, and the moving costs associated with any relocation will be carried by the relocation budget. A couple other things that we've worked through with the residents is we will be providing washers and dryers in all units. Residents who currently own pets will be able to keep them, and land will continue to be owned by the Housing Authority. I'm going to stop, Jessica.
You say that residents will be able to have pets. In your case for the deposit, we asked for if a resident has more than one pet to also let their pets go with them to where they're going. You agreed to that in negotiations, but on paper it says that we're only allowed to bring one, and it has to be on the lease already.
Jessica alludes to, we are still actually, there will be a documented relocation agreement that we've been negotiating with crew and their legal team that really spells out all the different things we've committed to. One of them is how we address pets both during the relocation process and as they come back. I'm not familiar with that particular piece, but I'm sure when we sit back down together, we'll work through it.
Can you go back to the other page? So washers and dryers, Maggie?
Yeah, so we asked you last year regarding the washer and dryer. So about we need the hook on the house. You said yes. So now you said you're not going to give it. You're just going to provide your own dryer.
No, I actually, what we're saying
No, we're
here
talking about
is
laundry
that we are
hookups.
providing washers and dryers to the tenants.
We asked for hookups in the new units because we have washers and dryers. We don't need washers and dryers. We didn't ask them for washers and dryers. We asked them for a line to plug our washer into and our dryers into.
Yeah.
That's what we wanted.
You
That's what
want
we
less,
agreed to.
we could probably accommodate less.
Maybe you could accommodate people who don't have those stuff, but let us take our own if we have them.
We can work through that. I think one thing, I failed to mention, we did hand out a sheet of some of our high-level commitments. If anyone's just curious, we have copies of it. Because a lot of people are getting questions on the project, I just wanna make sure we're as clear as we can be. I'm gonna go to this, yes,
Hi,
maybe,
hi,
yeah.
thank you. Okay. Can you go back to the slide before? I'm just wondering for the, you said that the moving cost of moving will be covered. Are there caps on that, or is it as much as it's gonna cost?
For the moving cost?
Yes.
Well, I think it's as much as it's gonna cost to move someone.
Okay, all right, so it's not expensive.
What about?
Well, there's a reasonableness language, I believe, in the, there's a reasonableness clause.
How
in the
long?
document.
How long will we
Can
be?
I think I see some people leaving. Can I just do the timeline, or, okay, is it Michelle? Go ahead.
Who is that guy?
Yo tengo una pregunta.
I have a question.
Yes.
Speak up.
Yo estuve en las negociaciones que se hicieron con relación a los espacios que se van a rentar al mercado.
I was present during the negotiations regarding the units that would be market rate.
En esos espacios le prohibían a los residentes de Clarendon que no podían usarlos.
At the
Entonces,
time,
mi pregunta es, ¿ya firmaron con sus?
Back then, it had been said that the existing residents of Clarendon Hill will not be allowed into certain sections of the facilities.
I understand that.
Market rate units are now. Well, has that been discussed? Has that been put on paper so far?
So, do you want me to wait for this?
Porque el miedo de los residentes es que si no hay una firma, tienen miedo de que hoy cambien, ustedes digan que sí y luego cambien de idea, cuando uno regrese vengan con otra cosa, y no queremos eso.
Because the main and perhaps one fear that residents have right now is that nothing's on paper and signed up by all the people
Everybody
in this negotiation. There's nothing to be achieved or secure in the future.
Okay, so regarding the commitments, we have written down some of the commitments that we heard
but they're not.
in signed documents.
4 of the commitment, you signed to guarantee 4 of the commitment.
I'm gonna continue, and we are continuing to negotiate a relocation agreement with crew.
Also, we're not done.
Yeah, because you
Well,
said that we were done. So
we
are we?
continuing to work towards a place where we sign that document together.
Thank
To
you.
respond to her comment. That document will be signed at some point to
You
document.
put all 216 state-aided units back and cater towards the
I can
needs of
only tell you that we
residents.
will sign those commitments. And if you want to read a draft of the plan as it stands right now, we can make it available to you. And in that draft, it says what we are committed to at this point in time. And in that list of things that we are committed to at this point in time, is that there will be some shared space in every building. Okay? And I'm gonna go to the gentleman in the glasses.
A lot of times, when there's 2 developers, it seems like the market rate developer gets the certificate of occupancy like years earlier than the affordable income developer. Is it possible to get all COs at once so that the affordable housing is complete and built?
Not in this project. So this is a phased project. So buildings A, B, and E are gonna be built as part of phase 1. The main reason this is a phased project is to help us with that relocation process, which is gonna be very difficult. And so, we would expect buildings A, B, and E to receive their certificates of occupancy at the same time. I can tell you that we're gonna have a binding agreement with the city and the state that says we have to complete this project and build the rest of these units, or we will be out of compliance with our zoning. I'm gonna go to the gentleman in the blue sweater.
Thank you. I want to thank you for your patience and your willingness to accept lots of variety of questions. And my question is about the units that are bought, the market rate units that are bought. The owners of those units, will they be able to rent those units, or will all units have to be owner occupied?
So everything that we have discussed tonight is a rental unit. There will be no homeownership units.
Oh, good.
Okay?
I want to know how long we get as those being displaced. What's the situation with storage? Because we thought it would be the duration of when people are relocated, or is it 6 months from what I've been hearing?
The relocation agreement, and someone who's sitting over there might know better than me, I believe we have to store to a reasonable extent your materials for the entire relocation period.
We had the language set to the duration of the time that the residents are displaced, so it's individually based and you guys change it to either 6 months or a year.
Okay, we can look at that next time we sit back down. I'm just gonna put this timeline up for those if I see folks kind of leaving, just so people can kind of see where we're going, and then we can keep going. Are there any questions? Yes, Tatiana.
So in reference to the timeline, I heard in terms of some conversation that went on tonight is there's still some questions about sort of landscaping. If we're talking about the design of the project, landscape plans, sort of setbacks, flood zone, engineering, and I'm not really clear that I understand the temperature of whether people want to talk more about traffic or the impacts of traffic. So in this discussion, you have labor discussion, but I think that there possibly will need, and I'll take the temperature of the people who are here in the room, about having another meeting, a community meeting, to sort of close out where we are on this before we move forward.
At some point, we're really going to have to engineer drawings and engineer some of these questions to be able to answer them appropriately. And that engineering really happens as part of our ZBA filing, just so folks understand that. We're going to be preparing a multi-100-page document for Sarah Lewis to review in her spare time. And from that, she will write a review and opinion of the planning department for the zoning board of appeals. And so I would expect that in the course of that, we're going to flush out a lot of those questions about landscape, flooding, and groundwater. And the ZBA process is a public process too, where you can come and ask additional questions. So I just want to make sure folks understand that. I'm going to go back over here, seeing none. Oh, I see an unfamiliar hand, so I'm going to call it. Yes?
I noticed there's a construction start. Any guess on an end?
And so we anticipate that each phase is about 24 months. So that puts us at, more than 4 years.
Oh my God, I lost my question.
Just want to go on record. We're going to be going through an overhaul zoning as elected officials, and we have budgets through having an entire month. I just want you to keep that in mind in terms of
Tori, did I get it right? Yes.
Tatiana's point, is the layout of the buildings, is that set where they are? Because I unfortunately had a hiatus going to these meetings, so I'm curious about the discussion of the placement of the buildings.
So I'll say this.
Yeah.
We would like it to be. We have been out here, for a very long time. the state has been patiently waiting to fund this project with its $17 million. They have tasked us with getting in the ground this fall, this November. That is what we are striving towards so that we do not lose that state subsidy. So what I would like to do is respond to your concerns via our zoning documents as we move forward. But this is something I think we've got to talk about.
This is the first meeting that people have seen this design. This is the first meeting.
I appreciate Cassiana's statement as the first meeting. I hope folks who have come to earlier meetings see that it is very responsive to some of the concerns that we heard in our workshops, in our Lego play, things we've heard when we sat down with the city and the transportation and infrastructure department, and that is recognized. I'm going to go over here to one of the three of you.
I should introduce myself, sorry, just so you don't have to keep nicely trying to figure out who I am. So my name is Melissa McWinney. I'm a resident here, and I'm speaking as a private citizen. I also work for the Massachusetts Department of Housing and Community Development. So I'm somewhat familiar with what happens there and funding issues. I would like to say something in response to Cassiana. Thank you. Yes, we would like to see a traffic meeting. And we would also like to see an environmental justice meeting, because there are certainly environmental justice issues here. And then the third thing I wanted to say was with respect to the phases and the buildings A, B, and C, and there will be 25 tenants move back into that. What is the process for determining who gets to come back into what buildings?
It'll be a lottery system. Based on priorities, as we work negotiated with the resident organization.
We have discussed that.
I'm going to go to Letitia and then Jessica.
I just want to know, so you guys say this is something that will help better Somerville and the future of Somerville, and you obviously know what Crew's thoughts are on the project. So one of my questions is, would you guys be willing to release what materials you're going to use to build these buildings? Because we would like to know that they could last even longer than the ones we have now, without them dealing with mold, falling apart, leakage. Like, this is a massive concern because we already deal with it now. We would like to know that it won't be an issue, and that if it does become an issue, it is dealt with immediately. And like maybe dealing with frozen piping as well. I mean, we just saw this winter was really cold. That's been an issue. So is it possible that once you guys have figured out like what you're going to use, that you guys will release this information to us as well? Because
I think that's a great question. I think what would be more productive is for us to sit down together and we design our plans and we share that with you and we say these are the things we're doing and how they work. Because releasing the plans is like
I understand that. I would like to, we'd like to meet the architect and understand like what these buildings are being built with and know that they're going to last a long time for the people of Somerville, for the future of Somerville.
Yeah, Jessica.
So the reason why she's asking that is because SCC has some involvement, and I've been talking to people at other properties with the SCC. Linden Street. Is that SCC or is it Housing Authority? They have people down there either way. The property was made 14 years ago, and I already have heard from lots of residents down there that that place is going down the tubes as well.
I think you should be careful about that, Jessica, frankly. And
I can be careful about as careful as it is. This is the same type of idea that you have down there with the mixed income state units, federal units, where the state units don't get kept up with. That's a concern.
Okay, so folks, I think we've covered the agenda for tonight.
The second question is, can the residents choose where we are placed? Will we be able to choose whether or not we have, to be put in a Section 8 subsidy or if we can stay in state? Some of us have medical marijuana license, and marijuana is legal in Massachusetts and the city. State units don't prohibit any marijuana, but federal units do. We have people on disability who have their marijuana license that if they are put into a Section 8 subsidy, then they are automatically breaking federal law.
That's
I've got to research the
that's a good
marijuana
question.
issue. I can say that in terms of do residents have a choice, I think it's going to be lottery when you come back. And so as part of that lottery, you will get placed in a unit. I think there will be some discussion around the use of whether or not you're in a federal unit or a state
And
unit.
I have one more. Right now, 268 is a fallout shelter. We have the little fallout biohazard, whatever. You're supposed to go into the basement of some sort. Is that like a real thing? Because if it is, and we take it away, we should definitely build another one.
I'm not sure.
Especially today, but you know.
So I'm gonna, my partner has a word to say.
Thank you, Corey. I just wanted to add to what Corey said about the timing and the idea of subsequent meetings, and also some of the comments that you all have made. So we have put a lot of work into the plan as it stands right now. But as in the nature of these things, it is a rough plan. It's a concept plan. It's not a detailed plan. So if for the president and others, if there's a desire to have another meeting to talk more about traffic and design, then we should figure out how to do that. That's important. But I just want to say, but we'll be presenting the same information. In other words, the question of what landscaping is going to be between the buildings and the L. White Brook Parkway is, in the scheme of things, is a detail. Maybe a very important detail to some people, but it's a detail. So we're not going to, we can't afford to spend all the money to come up with all the details of the engineering, to study the site, to understand where the groundwater is, to understand how far the garages can go down, to where the various parks are going to be, whether they're going to have fences on certain sides. Those are all important questions. But we're not going to have the answer to that now. So it's the decision for the residents and for the community. Is this a plan that people want us to proceed and spend a lot more time and effort and money on to get all those details right, or not? But that's a decision that does need to be made, if not tonight. If you see the timeline, literally in the next several weeks. And if the decision is there's so many questions or concerns, it doesn't make sense to proceed, then we won't. But if it does make sense to proceed, then we'll gladly continue to work with you to iron out all those particular questions, pet policy and everything else in the details as we go. But the fundamental issues that we're talking about, how the streets are going to work, what the buildings are going to look like, how we get the financing and so forth, we have done the best we can. And so we're here to answer any questions you have and to explain better why we made the decisions that we made. But this is the best proposal after a year and a half we've been able to come up with. And so we need the encouragement to consider, to continue and get into the details or not. And that's why we're having a meeting tonight. Glad to have another meeting so people can hear about it at greater length if they feel we shorted any part of the conversation. But I just don't want to, we're glad to have another meeting, but I don't want people to be misled and come back and say, you know, where's the groundwater table? Because we're not going to be, that's a complicated engineering question that costs money. We're not going to have that answer yet. And no one who's doing a project like this is going to have the answer to that question at this point. So I just wanted to elaborate on, just for the people considering whether we ought to have another meeting and what the agenda ought to be. That just, those are some considerations of whether that be helpful.
I just wanted to clarify, I wasn't just talking about what the landscaping is going to look like or what plants we use. I was more talking about from a health standpoint, if we need to do a further setback. And so that's actually informing on the site plan of where the buildings are. So I mean, or, you know.
So on that score, we've had a number of sessions, there are a number of competing issues about where these both buildings go, how far they're set back, how high they go, and this is the best we can do.
I mean, we just haven't had the pollution talk, the pollution study, and environmental justice. I would really like to see a meeting on that, just because I'll talk with you later about who's in buildings, but oftentimes, lower income units suffer, people live there suffer the most in terms of pollution. So I think if that hasn't been covered, I think it's a valid problem.
Yes, sir.
I was just gonna, so the young lady had a good question about materials and whatnot, and I just wanted to sort of piggyback off of that and go in a different direction, but the people who use the materials, to my knowledge, Gate has been, it has done a bunch of other projects and whatnot, and in some cases they've used some sort of, I guess what you call unscrupulous contractors who have been proven to have, hidden asbestos and, encourage some sort of underground economy, working with the underground economy, like Callahan, for instance. They do a lot of business with Callahan, and I was just curious to see if they had an idea of who would be their contractor of choice. It's clear that somebody of that caliber would raise some concerns additionally about what her concerns are.
Yeah, I think we've heard a concern about that particular contractor, so we're clear from a lot of folks, and we can say we're not using them. And we can say that we're going to have a forum on labor, and I'm actually honestly looking for maybe a date as early as next week. We're going to have hiring controls and try to make sure stuff like what you just described doesn't happen. But I'd love to talk about it more when we get this date. I'm sorry, I just haven't found a location quite yet. And I will add that we have a website, www.clarendonhill.org. All of our meeting materials are posted up there. All of our future meeting dates are up there. You can always go there. Usually if we have a meeting coming up, it pops up on the screen to say, hey, there's a meeting next week. So please, www.clarendonhill.org. I'm gonna let you guys go home.
Thank you.
Thank you.